So this is the timeline therapy section of our DVDs. And actually it is the master timeline therapy, the second level of timeline therapy. And I am honored to be to be next to and to have as partner in life the creator of timeline therapy, Thad James.
This is our master timeline therapy training. If you have not yet watched the practitioner level of timeline therapy, some of the things we talk about are quite advanced and may not be immediately obvious. You probably ought to go back, if you have the DVD set, and go back and watch the practitioner level of timeline therapy. So this is our master training. This is our most advanced level of timeline therapy. And we recorded this in Sydney because we love Sydney. So we have a really lively master practitioner group. You'll enjoy the questions, I'm sure, and you'll enjoy the interaction of the students.
Now, why on earth would you be interested in watching this? It's just very simple. Because in the history of mankind, there has never been a technique that allows you to easily and effortlessly, painlessly let go of negative emotions from your past. All of the negative emotions from your past in a matter of 10 minutes per negative emotion. So much so that when they're gone, they're gone. And they're gone out of their life and they stop bothering you like they've never been there before.
And they stay gone.
That's worth.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how to get the most out of this video?
Yeah.
Because you're watching it, you're not really at the training.
Yeah.
First of all,
I mean, the best thing would be for you to be in a training, because then you have the opportunity to experience it firsthand, the exercises and the techniques practiced with you as a client during the training. But you're not at the training.
yeah. So best thing to do is whenever we do an exercise, the best thing for you to do is to stop the video and do the exercise. So whenever I say stop the video and do the exercise now, that would be a really good idea. Now I know that sometimes there's nobody around, or sometimes you're not in the right place or time to be able to do that.
Sure.
But as often as you can, you should do these exercises because they really do work. You should also have a familiarity with the timeline therapy practitioner level material, and if you don't have that, you should call our office in the US or our office in Australia. This is the latest, most up-to-date material in timeline therapy. It's the state of the art in terms of timeline therapy. It has our newest techniques that we've just developed in there. So really have an enjoyable time. Watch it, go through the exercises, and assist us in transforming the planet. When you're done doing the exercises, it would be a good idea to watch some of the students, because some of our students had incredible breakthroughs. This was a very, very powerful training.
Have fun. It's worth every minute.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back, you guys. How you doing?
How you doing?
Good. Good.
Hey, this is the timeline therapy section.
Timeline therapy today.
Yeah.
Hey, is it raining out enough for you guys or no? So this is the timeline therapy master practitioner training. Woo, look out.
Look out, indeed.
This is the heavy duty stuff. We're going to pull out the stops, finish up, bring it on, yeah. We're going to pull out the stops, finish up all the techniques you don't have. Let you know what's what. So you should be able to figure out what's what.
What's what?
Yeah. What's what? Or what's not what, yeah. Ooh, too much quantum linguistics. So let's see, a good master practitioner of timeline therapy should know, well, an excellent master practitioner of timeline therapy should know how to elicit the timeline. Now I'm going to assume that you got that in your timeline therapy practitioner training. A good practitioner of the timeline ought to know, master practitioner ought to know how to take a detailed personal history. We're going to cover that here. How to eliminate a negative emotion and a limiting decision. We're going to cover that. We covered that in practitioner. You should know by now how to do all of that well. Yeah. How to change the direction of the timeline. We're going to cover that here again, because in some trainings we cover that and some we don't. How to create your future. How to create your future.
By inserting goals in your future timeline and making them happen.
You should know that. By now you should have that all tightly tucked in under your belt.
Also, how to use timeline therapy in conjunction with any other medical advice you get from your medical doctor in assisting you to alleviate certain physiological
or psychological
manifestations.
Issues. Yeah.
Also, the drop-down true technique.
Yep.
And how to use timeline therapy for regression purposes.
And
one
of the most exciting things, the pain paradigm.
And the relationship paradigm.
Yeah, those are two exciting things. So we're going to cover all of that. The stuff you should know, we want to begin by asking, are there any questions about negative emotions, number one, number two, limiting decisions, or putting something in your future? Is there any questions you guys have like that? And let me just answer a couple of questions that we got in the question box. You know, we have a question box in all our trainings.
We do. We like questions. Questions are good.
Questions are good. So are there any times when NLP/timeline therapy, et cetera, I'm worried about the et cetera, techniques are not appropriate for people who have been diagnosed, in quotes, with mental illness, for example, bipolar, et cetera? So first of all, what I want to say is, what do I want to say about that? What I want to say is if you're not a medical practitioner or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it would be inappropriate for you to do any work with bipolar disorder because that's a medical diagnosis. So any client who's been diagnosed with a medical condition or a psychological condition should be under the care of his psychiatrist or psychologist. If you're not a licensed person, it would be inappropriate for you to work with that. Now, the safest thing to do is to get a referral from a medical doctor. So if a client comes to you, because we've had real good luck with bipolar disorder, but only with the referral
in conjunction
with a medical doctor.
with a medical doctor.
Only with the referral of a medical doctor, psychiatrist, or psychologist would you do any work with bipolar. Now, is there any times when timeline therapy is not appropriate? Yes. You wouldn't do timeline therapy with someone who hadn't, with one of those issues who hadn't been referred to you, right? Now, is there any time if you're referred or if you're a medical doctor, is timeline therapy appropriate? Yes. Yes. And if you need assistance in terms of following through with your client or your patient, and you're one of those personnel who has a referral, either give us a call in Australia or in the US, or send us an email, and we'll get back to you with follow-up in case you need support. That having been said, timeline therapy works really well. And are there times when it's not appropriate? Not that I'm aware of, except unless, and probably the toughest thing is a client who can't visualize, who doesn't have any auditory, internal,
And doesn't have any kinesthetic.
and has no kinesthetics, in other words, simply has AD, that kind of client's probably not going to be able to do timeline therapy. But what would you do instead? Quantum linguistics,
Quantum
exactly.
linguistics, exactly.
Exactly. Quantum linguistics from the Master Practitioner NLP training. So you
Or
would absolutely
if
do
it
that.
depends on how much time the client's willing to invest, you can do overlapping. Remember the NLP technique that allows a person to go from most preferred representational system to least preferred and bring into clients' awareness either the visual or auditory or kinesthetic or maybe all three of them, depending how much time the client wants to invest in this. But otherwise, as you know, timeline therapy is a process that doesn't require only visual, because there are people who do it auditorily, as sounds floating in the wind, or kinesthetically, like floating in a bathtub. So it doesn't require a specific modality for being able to successfully do timeline therapy. However, it requires to have imagination, because timeline therapy is a process of active imagination. And as all of us, we are able to imagine things. We imagine things in our heads since we're children. Timeline therapy is a very easy process to do.
I think that's an important concept.
I think this is a vital concept, actually, in timeline therapy to understand. And so if you understand this and your client understands that timeline therapy is a process of active imagination, you will never be put in a situation when the client says to you, well, my timeline, I couldn't find my timeline, or my timeline doesn't come to me, because it's not supposed to. The client's supposed to imagine the timeline. And the paradox here is, because you'll have clients who will say to you, but I don't want to imagine something that's wrong. Or I don't know if I'm making it up. Both are possible.
Well, you really can't
By the way, you
make
can't,
it up wrong.
You can't, and you are making it up because you are imagining it, but you can't imagine something that's not yours. That's the paradox. You can't imagine my timeline.
Well, I could if I knew what it was, but that doesn't mean it's mine.
It doesn't mean it's yours, exactly. So that's the paradox. Whatever you or your client, but if you do work on yourself or your client imagines in a coaching situation, is true and is correct for the client.
So listen, you guys are almost at the master practitioner level, completed, graduated, certified as timeline therapy master practitioners. The most important thing to understand about timeline therapy is that timeline therapy is a process of active imagination, which means that the client is to actively imagine what you're suggesting. Now, this is a recent revelation that's come to us in the last couple of years.
See, we got students in a class that said, you know, my timeline doesn't come to me. We go, why? How is it possible for this person to sit there and say, my timeline doesn't come to me?
Yeah.
when we know clearly that every person has some form of linear arrangement of
Of the
time,
timeline.
because you all know the difference between past, present, and future.
Don't
There
you?
is somehow a form of knowing this difference inside of you. So it's either a spatial or a linear or both arrangement of the events coming from your past and going in your future, somehow in a form that you can relate to them.
So this is a revelation we've come to in the last few years.
So
It's,
then,
for example, when
yeah.
you say to the client, where's your past and where's your future, we're not suggesting the timeline has reality. It's not real. In other words, real, by the way, the word real means having substance.
Being solid, having substance, yeah?
This table has substance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got some substance. Your timeline doesn't have substance, so we're not thinking it's real. It's a mental construct.
Construct.
And so what the client says, I can't float above the time. This is really important. The client says, I can't float above the time. Because I've even had, I think even had people in this class who said, my client told me he couldn't do it. So this is really important to understand. Timeline therapy is a process of active imagination. If the client doesn't have imagination, okay, I can see how that's possible. But some clients just don't have the thinking necessary to do it,
Or the strategy
or the
to
strategy
imagine.
to do what you're asking. So here's an example. I had one client says, I can't imagine floating above my timeline. I said, you just have to imagine it. He said, I can't imagine it. I said, well, could you imagine getting in this elevator at this hotel and going up 8 floors? Oh, yes, he said, I could do that. Good. Could you imagine walking out on the top floor, on the roof, up on the roof, and walk out on the balcony, walk up on the top of the roof and go over to the edge of the building and look down? He said, yes, I could imagine that. So I said, good. So could you imagine cars going by in front of you like cars on a road? He said, oh, yeah, I could imagine that. Good. I said, now imagine that the cars are memories in your past and that you're simply floating above that road with the memories in the past as you go back in the past. Oh, he said, I could imagine that.
So this client
just
simply didn't have a strategy
He just didn't know how to do it.
for imagining the timeline. So with some clients, you may have to give them a strategy. But most people are simply able to imagine. And by the way, the client may ask you, I'm imagining this or that. Is that correct? Or is that right? And whatever, by the way, have no judgment. However the client imagines the timeline is correct for the client.
As long as we get results.
As
So-
long as the client follows your instructions.
Yeah, we're pragmatic about that.
And by the way, because many people in this group, most people actually in this group said that you're going to use what you learn here in a business type context. Timeline therapy is extremely, extremely useful to get rid of performance issues in business. Because if
useful in coaching.
If people have limitations of limiting beliefs or limiting decisions, and by the way, most people who don't perform to their ability, to their highest potential, are blocked by this
Simply have
limiting beliefs about themselves.
limiting beliefs and limiting decisions.
And so if you can assist them to let go of those limiting beliefs and start believing in themselves,
You'll send their
up to
performance through the roof.
their performance will go through the roof.
Now, a couple of other thoughts about clients not actively imagining what you're suggesting.
Right.
I had one client, he says, I can't float above my timeline. I said, why not? Because I'd like to know. Yeah, I'd like to know. I mean, I could say, what would happen if you did? Or I could say, just suppose you floated above your timeline. But let's say the client says, I can't do that. So I had one client who said, I can't float above my timeline. I said, well, why not? He said, well, there's a wall between me and the past.
What's this? By the way, what's the wall? A metaphor.
It's a metaphor.
Exactly, that's a metaphor.
Exactly right. The wall's a metaphor. It's just a metaphor. It's a metaphor for, I'm not going to do what you're suggesting.
So whatever objection the client gives you, treat it as a metaphor and work around his metaphor with your metaphor.
So I said, float above the wall. He said, I can't. It's infinitely high. I said, good. Float up infinitely high plus a couple of feet and float over the wall. Yeah? So he's doing it in his mind. He can certainly float up 2 feet over, or if you're doing it in metric, whatever that is, he can certainly float up 2 feet over the wall. Yeah? Now here's another client. He said, I can't float above my timeline into the past, above the past. He said, because there's a door there. I said, open the door. He said, I can't. It's locked. I said, here's the key. He goes, oh, click.
Yeah.
So whatever metaphor the client gives you, give him the same metaphor back and have him float above his timeline. But if the client doesn't give you a metaphor, follow the script. That's important, by the way. If you're watching these DVDs, it's important to follow the script. It's
Very.
important to follow the script until you're as good as Adriana is, because you're the best, or as good as I am at doing timeline therapy. And when you're that good, you can do whatever you want. But in the meantime, follow the script. And follow the script. And, oh, by the way,
Follow the script.
follow the script. Good. Now, so your job while you're here in the Master Practitioner Timeline Therapy is to discover once and for all that timeline therapy absolutely works and produces results. That's your job. So to that end, you need to get clear in your mind about everything that prevents you from getting those results. Now, we're going to learn some very, very powerful new techniques that we haven't covered at all yet during this training. And that will give you new ways of looking at timeline therapy and new interventions to be able to do.
However, as we said before, I hope that by now you all are really confident in using negative emotions number 1 and negative emotions number 2, as well as the limiting decision process. Because these new techniques are actually building up on the understanding of how to use timeline therapy at the practitioner level. They're not something separate. They are actually add-ons at the master level. But the core issue is that unless you can do negative emotions number 1 with any client in front of you and know that you can achieve results, all these extra techniques won't help you. All these extra techniques won't help you.
Exactly. So we're going to take questions now regarding negative emotions number 1, negative emotions number 2, limiting decision process. Any questions you've got, any time where it didn't work, any time where...
Yes, if you ever had an instance when it didn't work, for you or for a client of yours, let's see what could have happened, and let's talk, because it's very good for you to talk about the tough clients, because the easy clients are the easy clients.
Oh, that's a good point. The easy clients,
I mean,
they're easy,
no
let's
problem.
face it. The easy clients, you go, where's the emotion? They go, it's gone. You go, good, come back to now, let go of the rest of it. They go, good, it's all gone. They, wow, what a big change. Those are easy. Those aren't the ones where we learn. The ones where we learn are the clients where we have to do every reframe in the book.
Yeah.
Everything we know, we have to do everything we know and to make it work. We have a question.
I suppose the question is, I've gone through and I've done the reframing, I've done the rising right above, and they seem to still hold on to the emotion. I started becoming a little bit creative.
Well, then, if the client doesn't let it go after those two, you have to do the third thing. And the third thing is the reframing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you start, did you do the reframing?
Did the reframing.
Great.
Yeah. But I kind of added some strategies in, and I was just wanting to check that if this was okay. I got them to imagine that they were connected to the emotion with an umbilical cord and chop the connections, and it seemed to work.
Yeah, the question is, does the emotion disappear? I think you have, well, so first let me tell you something. I've done Secret to Creating Your Future since 1989. And in the last 4 years, I started experimenting. And I only did timeline therapy and didn't get cute or tricky. And I instructed all of my coaching assistants to only do timeline therapy. So I didn't say, imagine the person in a bubble of healing light, or put pink balloons around them. I didn't say, imagine an umbilical cord.
Actually, in the old editions
And
of
you cut it?
timeline therapy,
There is an umbilical cord that you cut.
we used to have an infinite source of love and light and healing above the top of the head of the client, and they will come in and heal the client, and then the emotion will disappear. But we realized actually that
That could be a Band-Aid.
as well as the bubble of pink light and healing around the client could be just a Band-Aid. See, if the
Could
unconscious mind, the key is, if the unconscious mind is really willing to let go, and the client's really willing to let go,
It'll let go.
it will let go.
If it doesn't, if it's not willing to let go, it won't let go. And so we can do all the nice little things, and perhaps we'll get results. So as long as the client got rid of the emotion, what you did was not wrong. But I wouldn't do it every time, because I'm clear that timeline therapy, the way it is, produces results. And probably we're further ahead if we can standardize what each person does. Now, I've been experimenting for the last 4 years, and I haven't gone off the script for the last 4 years, just experimenting. Because I know there's all kinds of other stuff I could do. I know I could give all kinds of suggestions. I know we could do infinite source of love and healing. I know we could do pink bubble of light. I know we could take the emotion and blow it up in the sun. I know that we could shrink it down, make it small and dark and totally black in the left-hand corner of the screen, etc. There's all kinds of things we can do. But what I've done just to experiment, because after Adriana and I got together, we decided, let's just experiment with the 3 things.
We just did that.
which is not high enough, not far enough back. That's the first one. The second one is not before the first event. And the third thing is reframing. And what we do in The Secret of Creating Your Future is we go like this.
In order.
With the group, in order. 1, 2, 3.
And when the coaching assistants go, if a person doesn't let go of the negative emotions, they need assistance, then the coaching assistants go in the group. Actually, what the coaching assistants do is exactly the same thing.
They do exactly the same thing we do. But we go in the group, 1, 2, 3, of those 3 things. And then again, if the group doesn't let it go, we go 1, 2, 3 again.
Same thing.
And I've experimented with it and gone 1, 2, 3 a third time. And by the third time, we have 99% of the people in the room who have let go of the negative emotion. And when the coaches go into the group, they do the same thing as we do, and they're still doing 1, 2, 3, and that was sufficient.
The people may simply need to go 3 times to it because they have a 3 times convincer. And they need to hear it 3 times before they can let it go.
And what you did wasn't wrong,
No.
but I wouldn't do it unless I had to. And I've done it. If you read the book Timeline Therapy, I think we were, in some part in that book, we were unhooking the emotions in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. Yeah, that was another technique that was metaphorical, and the current technique works better.
Okay.
Yeah.
I only did like 1, 2, 3, and then I jump into that one, so I just didn't keep.
Yeah, I would do 1, 2, 3 of the 3 things, and if you're watching these videos for the first time, the 3 things are on page 16. The 3 things to check at position 3, page 16. Make sure the client's really in position 3. Make sure the client's before the first event, and make sure all of the client's unconscious mind is agreeable to let go of the emotion. So I would do it a couple times anyway. And having done the 3 things twice or 3, I've done it 4 times, and we get about 99% of the room. In A Secret of Creating Your Future with 100 people in the room, 99 to 100% of the people, if we do it 3 times, will be sufficient.
And now, the reason why we insist on doing the 3 things in this order, and we gave up actually any additional metaphorical thing, is because ultimately it gives the client more power, and the client's communication and integration, conscious mind, unconscious mind, it's far more complete than, think of it from the cause and effect point of view. If we do a metaphor, the client will think, oh, it's because I imagined the infinite source of love and healing. So it wasn't me, it was the infinite source of love and healing. It wasn't me, it was the fact that I chopped the umbilical cord. It wasn't me, it was the fact that I was protected by the bubble of light. But that's because the client thinks that he's not protected or safe all the time.
And honestly, I stopped doing the infinite source of love and healing when I got feedback from a client that she didn't let go of the emotion and she did the infinite source of love and healing, and that covered up the negative emotion, so she felt a lot better. But when we delved underneath the infinite source of love and healing, we found that the negative emotion was still there. And the important thing about timeline therapy is that the negative emotion goes. So when you clip the umbilical cord, the negative emotion still could be present.
Could.
And that's, theoretically, doesn't mean that it is, but that's the philosophical problem I have with that. And if the client got rid of her negative emotions, you did great.
You did everything perfect.
So good job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Could you just explain, I had a client doing the negative emotions, and when we went back to position 3, and I asked her where were the emotions, she said, well, of course they're gone, it's before the event. I don't think that would have...
No, it does work.
It does work.
It does work. In fact, you go, that's right, they're not there, are they? And she goes, no. You say, good, now go down inside the event. That's the next step, step 4. Now go down inside the event and check on the emotions. Are they there or have they disappeared now? And the client goes, oh, they're gone. You go, that's right.
By the way, that's not a rare occurrence. You'll have many people, as you practice and you do work with your client, there are many people who will say that. Now, because we did quantum linguistics and we have the understanding of non-mirror image reverse, the emotions disappear not because you're before it happened, although, yes, it is that because it happened. It's before it happened. But the client will be very surprised when you go immediately down the event and test for the emotion, and the client goes, well, it should be here. I felt it 1 moment ago.
I know it was there.
I know it was there, and
But
yet
now it's
now I
not
don't
there.
feel it anymore.
Isn't that great?
And as long as the emotion is gone, again, whatever the client did is perfect. And if the client thinks that the emotion disappears just because you're before that, well, so be it. The most important thing that the client comes back to now and doesn't have to carry with him or her the negative emotions from the past. He's free of that.
I would say that the occurrence of a client saying, I don't know where they are because of course they're not there because I'm before the event, is as frequent as 1 in 10 to 1 in 20. So somewhere between 10% and 5% of the people will, if they don't say that, will think that.
But just remember one thing. One moment ago, the client was sure that the emotion was
Yeah,
there.
1 moment ago, you could even say this, and I would say this in a demonstration.
You were sure. Oh, I know, I got blah emotion.
But a moment ago, you were sure they were there.
And now they say,
Now
well,
you're sure they're
I'm
not
not
there.
sure,
Or you're
I
not
don't
sure
know.
they're there.
which is perfect.
And then you can say, and being not sure is good. And
It's
the client
great.
gets a little smile on his face. You go, that's right. Yeah, so that does work, and that's not a rare occurrence.
Yes.
Not a rare occurrence at all.
Yes.
I'd like to know the difference between negative emotion 1 and negative emotion 2.
Well, if you look at page 15, we've got the 4 positions. Negative emotions number 1 is the client's dissociated from the beginning. So in positions 1, 2, 3, the client is dissociated from the event, not in the event, and the emotion lets go or is eliminated or released in the process before the client even goes down in the memory. Yeah? In negative emotions number 2, which is on page 19, the client immediately goes down into position number 4. So the client goes up in the air, back in the past, and down into the event. When that happens, the client is associated into the memory. And just for the purpose of picking up the negative emotions and noticing what emotions are present. It's kind of like, did you ever jump in a swimming pool when it was real cold, or a lake? And it was really cold, and you jump in the lake, you go, wah, and you jump back out. That's the amount of time that the client needs to spend in there as long as he or she gets the emotion and notices what emotion's present. Now, when would you use negative emotions number 1? I developed negative emotions number 1 because I did A Secret of Creating Your Future in 1989 in Los Angeles with 60 people, first one we ever did. And I used negative emotions number 2 for that. And I think the first emotion we got rid of was fear. And at that point, I had about a third of the room associated into traumatic memories. And since I had no coaching assistants, because it was the first one we ever did, so we had no coaching assistants, so I had to assist those 20 people to get out of their, or 15 people to get out of their negative emotions, which was, that was a great learning experience for me. I thought, better develop another technique, because if we're going to do this in groups, it clearly doesn't work. So negative emotions number 1 is for groups. For sure, for groups. Not 2, 1. Use negative emotions number 1 for groups.
So negative emotions number 1, generally speaking, is very much useful when you see the client associated into the problem. And you will recognize this when you do the detailed personal history, because you'll notice, is the client emotional about the problem?
Yeah, is he plugged in?
Or is he just cool-headed, talking about it, and there are no
Talking
emotions
about it
present?
dissociatedly.
Dissociated
Like
way.
he would say, well, you know how it is when you feel anger.
Yeah.
And then you might use negative emotions number 2 because you know the client's not associated. Remember, the rule of thumb in neuro-linguistic programming is present state associated, desired state dissociated. So a client who knows what the emotion is, let's say we're doing anger, the client who knows the emotion of anger is going to find it really easy to let go of anger with negative emotions number 1.
But if the client doesn't know he has anger because he's so dissociated from that anger, how are you going to do negative emotion? I mean, what are you going to let go of? So then first, with the client that's dissociated by nature and from his emotions, you will use negative emotions number 2, because going down in the event first has the person associated, and the person can notice, oh, I do have X emotion, that
Yeah,
emotion,
yeah.
whatever that is. Now I can let
now I
it go,
get it.
because now I'm aware of it.
Yeah. Now, negative emotions number 2 is useful when the client has, like here's an example. How many people in the room, let's get a show of hands here. How many people in the room, when I said, or when your practitioner said, now where's the emotion?
First time.
First time you ever did it. You said, how do I know where the emotion is? I didn't feel it in the first place. Who's ever said that to themselves? I've had clients say that to me, by the way. I've had one client go, how do I know where the emotion is? When you say, where is the emotion? I don't know where it is. I didn't know where it was. That's a client for whom I'd use negative emotions number 2. Because he's going, what do you mean, where's the emotion? I don't know where it is in the first place. So you got to use 2 for him.
Make it go back into the event.
You want him in
Yes.
the, you want him not for the content of the event, but for getting the emotion
For the
so he gets it.
association with the emotion.
Because present state associated, desired state dissociated. He goes in and feels the anger. Then he pops out of the event and back up to position number 3. And
Gets the learnings.
He lets go of gets the learnings and lets go of the anger. So for that client, you'd use negative emotions number 2.
How do we know that we have gone far back enough? The reason why I'm asking the question is
I can answer. Let me just answer it first, and then you can tell me. We know we've gone far enough back when the emotion disappears.
okay. In the prac class, I did the test, and currently today, I went back to 20 past lives back,
Good for you.
and where I was a very primitive person.
Cool. I'm still primitive, personally.
Yep. Yep. And I knew that I have really uprooted the anger bit. And
Good for you.
There's a vast difference.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Did
Good
the
f-
anger disappear?
Good for
Good,
you. Give her a
good.
hand.
So you've done perfectly.
Good job.
See, it's very important to understand something, and I know this is by means of repeat, it's from the practitioner, but I think it's very important to understand that the issue of past lives is an issue that some people go, oh, don't talk to me about past life, this is rubbish. Past lives don't exist. However, there are people who say, well, past lives do exist. And so it's actually pointless to even launching a discussion of proving or disproving the existence of past lives. That's not the point. There are people who believe in past lives, and there are people who don't believe in past lives. There are people's conscious minds that don't believe in past lives, and there are people unconscious minds that do believe in past lives. And if past lives don't exist, per se, let's say they do not.
Then there certainly is
Absolutely.
an archetype that exists
There must be an archetype.
where
but-
a whole lot of people have past life experiences, if past
Or-
lives don't exist.
Absolutely. Or it could be a simple symbol from the unconscious mind or a metaphor from the unconscious mind. In all of these cases, better work with it.
Yeah, in every case, if it's an archetype,
Better
and the,
work
and
with
the
it.
client says, I have a past life, we better work with it.
Sure.
Even if you don't believe in past lives yourself. Even if you don't believe in past lives yourself, if the client says, I believe in past lives, then you probably ought to work with it, because if you go, oh, that's stupid, or, oh, that's a bunch of baloney, or even worse,
Yeah.
what's going to happen is the client, see, and I had a woman come to me, she said, Ted, I'm a Catholic, and I'm a psychologist, and I don't believe in past lives, so don't give me any. Okay, all right. She said, I've read your book, and there's too much past life stuff in your book. I said, okay. So first thing I said, where's the first event? She said, you know what, Ted, it's coming up past life.
Isn't that funny?
Her unconscious mind had a sense of humor. No, this is an absolutely
After
true,
arguing, you know?
absolutely true story. So she said, is that possible? I said, let's just go along with what your unconscious mind says. I mean, at least she was honest, yeah? She went back. We were using negative emotions number 2. She went back, and she had a clear, vivid experience of past lives. Then she came back, and she said, I had a clear, vivid experience of past lives. Is that possible? I said, you know, what can I say? Your unconscious mind certainly gave you a metaphor, at very least, for something. Did you get the message? That's the most important thing. So the important thing is not whether you believe in past lives. It doesn't matter whether I believe in past lives. Does your client's unconscious mind?
One more thing I think it's important. It's absolutely important for you as master practitioners to understand. In timeline therapy, we call this the learnings. But the process that goes on is the fact that the client finds meaning in whatever traumatic experience happened in the past. The
Yes, this is
issue is
vital.
meaning.
This is vital.
So the issue is that the client finds the meaning is the learning, and client puts that meaning in that special place where reserved for special learnings, which act as resources in the future. Doesn't matter what happened in the past. Doesn't matter, I mean, it matters, of course it matters.
Well, we care. We're caring people.
Absolutely. But there are people who go through extremely traumatic experiences, and yet they are empowered as a result. They are they're stronger, they're more prone to success, paradoxically, because of what happened in the past. And there are people who go through not so traumatic experiences, and yet they don't make it as well in life as the others.
Human beings look for meaning in
We
the
need
events
meaning.
of their past.
We need meaning. We need to understand what was the purpose for that experience.
And that's what learnings do.
I just went through a very
That's the
traumatic
purpose of
experience.
learnings.
What's the purpose? I mean, I need to find some purpose in this. Otherwise, what's the point? And so this is crucial. This is when negative emotions will always disappear, when the client finds meaning.
If the client finds meaning,
Unless the client found the real meaning,
Done.
the emotions will hang in there. Also, it's also the issue of secondary gain, as you remember. Secondary gain can take the form of, I need to punish somebody for what they did to me, consciously or unconsciously or both.
by the way, don't get hung up in insisting the client has to have meanings, because that may be your hang up, not the client's. If the emotions disappear, we take it to mean
Say that again. Say that. This is it. This is it. If the emotions disappear,
if the emotions disappear, we take it to mean the client had sufficient learnings. If the emotions disappear, we take it to mean that the client had sufficient learnings. So there were sufficient learnings. If the emotions don't disappear, then we do the three things in order. Not high enough, not far enough back, not before the first event, and then we go do reframing, which includes getting more learnings. Very, very important. Very, very important. Okay. Yes, we have a question.
In terms of the learnings,
Yes.
I've been using the timeline therapy and have had amazing results. It's fantastic, and I really thank you so much for teaching it to us, because it's a technique that I've found to be really easy, because I just read the script. And I just read the script. And,
We apologize for that.
you know, and I found initially where they were going to position 3, and then I'd go and check in position 4, and it hadn't released, and then I'd just loop back round again, and I found the first few people I had to loop back round again a few times, and then the next few people I didn't seem to, so maybe I got better at getting them high enough
Yeah.
and further enough back in position 3. I think I kind of fine-tuned that.
Yeah.
What I have noticed is that some of the people I've worked with have done quite a lot of programs, and so they're familiar with affirmations about what it means to me. You know, I am
Good.
okay, I am strong, and the learnings that I don't need to. I don't need to reframe them too much in when they're in the meetings. But there's quite a few people where. And what the question really is how do you pre-frame it with them, or do you, before they are actually in the situation, looking in the timeline from position 3, looking for the learnings? Because I
Or
might get
position 2.
something. I might get something. Yes, that's right. Yes, because I followed the script. I haven't quite got it yet,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
wherever they're supposed to be, and they're looking down and they're getting the learnings, and it's things like, don't get involved. And it's clearly,
So
you
then
know,
you say,
negative,
and-
and it's not about them. And
Yeah, so first of all, so then what you're noticing is, on page 16 at the bottom, notes regarding learnings, you're noticing people are giving you negative others past learnings, which, by the way, negative others past learnings don't work as well. They work,
but not as well
but
as
not as well as,
positive self-future learnings.
Yeah.
So then if you hear a client giving you negative others past, you can simply say, so how would that be now for you, for your future, a positive learning, just for you, not for others, just for you?
I might say something like, wow, what a great learning. Not. So, and I'd laugh a little bit. I go, so what would be the learning for you?
Yeah.
Which would be positive self-future. I mean, what kind of learning could you get about that? And then they might say, oh, yeah, okay, then boom.
so that kind of interaction you do there, rather than pre-frame them about, now we'll be looking for learnings, and you want it to be positive and self and future. You don't necessarily.
We do it on the spot.
We don't handle it unless we need to.
Because one thing I wondered was, when we were doing it in the course, you had spent quite a lot of time actually coaching us as to what the learnings were going to be, because you're teaching us as practitioners. And so I wondered whether part of the way that I was working with my clients was that I should also kind of set them up
I mean, you could.
in that way.
If you wanted to take the time to do that. I don't.
You don't, no. And we could simply just reframe it like you did just then.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But that's just as effective, and then a couple of times of that, and they'll only have positive learnings.
Thank you.
Question over here.
I had a client who was releasing disappointment,
Disappointment.
and she went a couple of generations back
Good.
to release the disappointment. and it had a relation to with her grandfather. And while she was releasing her frustration, she associated.
You said disappointment.
Yeah, sorry, disappointment. And
By the way, listen when if a client does that. Yeah. Listen. So the client says, when I was releasing disappointment, and then later on the client says frustration. That's something you need to listen to, because that would mean that
Maybe there's another emotion there.
there's another emotion there. Sorry, go ahead.
so she was releasing disappointment, and she associated into grief. She hadn't ever grieved for her grandfather, and she associated into that emotion
Yes.
while she was releasing her disappointment.
Yes.
And so I got her to go into position 3 and moved her higher and farther back until she'd let go of the disappointment,
Yes.
and she'd calm down from the grief that she was experiencing. Is that the right thing to do? Is it allowing her the grief in the moment?
Did you let go of the grief as a separate emotion afterwards?
I can't see grief, if it's the first time, as being irrational or not appropriate for her.
So listen carefully. This is very, very important. In fact, it's what's going to cause me to reword all of the scripts. There's no such thing as appropriate negative emotions in the past.
I mean, it was appropriate at the time it happened, but it's not appropriate 20 years later.
So, for example, a client who's still grieving after 20 years is, see, you've mixed up parts of the script. When it says inappropriate or unwarranted, that's only in the future. Yeah? So the question, so here's what I would do if I were doing that. What I would do is I would let go of
Finish disappointment.
disappointment and get it all done. Test it, it's all done. Then I would say to the client, have you grieved appropriately or sufficiently yet?
That's what I asked about her grandfather when we came back.
And then she will either say yes or no. If she says yes, then you say, good, would you like to get rid of it? She says yes. If she says no, I'd say, well, let's just ask the part of you inside you that is your grandfather, have you grieved enough? Because I've never had that part say no. I can imagine it's possible. So if the client were at that point to say, my grandfather says I haven't grieved enough for him, then I would say, good, let's schedule that.
This is, by the way, an Ericksonian technique.
It's an Ericksonian technique. So let's schedule that grief every morning between 4 and 5 a.m. before you wake up, so that you can do a full job of grieving in your sleep and then forget about it each night until you're done grieving. How long will you need to grieve? And she'll say a week or a month but honestly, if I ask the part of me inside me that is that person, and I do some reframes while I'm asking, I've never ever had a person who the client was grieving for say that the client hadn't grieved enough. And so I would say, let me talk to the part of you inside you that's your grandfather, and let's ask him, have you grieved enough? Because all grandfathers want to be remembered with positive emotions rather than negative emotions. And remembering him with a positive emotion would be far better than continuing to feel bad about him, because that'll just get anchored to him. Or if the client knows anchored. If the client doesn't know what anchored means, then you'd use
Connected.
you get connected
Another
or some
word.
other word, yeah?
And then you would do grief.
And then the
as a
client would say,
separate negative
okay, good,
emotion.
my grandfather said I can let go of the grief, and then you'd do grief as a separate negative emotion. The reason you wouldn't do it right there and then is because each negative emotion has a first event. And the first event for one negative emotion that's different from another negative emotion, probably, not always, I would say probably, which means at least half the time will have a different first event. And since the percentage is so high, we want to let go of the first event first, as you remember from Finding the Root Cause, which is on page 14. As you remember, we always go for the first event first. So if I were letting go of disappointment and grief came up, I would definitely say, okay, we'll handle the grief as soon as we're done with disappointment, but let's do disappointment first. So then I would do it that way. Does that make sense? Yeah. And please remember this, because many of you are going to go on and teach others timeline therapy, and we totally welcome that. Once you take the timeline therapy trainers training, I think it would be awesome. We need more timeline therapy trainers out there. We need tons of people out there teaching timeline therapy to the world, because I think it's got a great possibility of making a difference on this planet, dramatically. Please remember, there are no negative emotions that are appropriate for the client to hold on to in the past. They were appropriate when the client experienced them. But in the script on page 15 and others, it says, I want you to go out in the future to an unspecified time. In the future, which would have happened in the past, you would have felt inappropriate or unwarranted. Blank. And notice if you can find that old emotion, or you may find that you cannot. So let's make very sure that we don't say to the client, oh, it's okay, that emotion. Because when you were angry in the past, I mean, unless you're an anger head, is that a term?
Now it is.
It is now. Unless you're an anger head or but there was no anger that wasn't appropriate in the past. Unless you're a sadness person and overly sad, there was no sadness in the past that wasn't appropriate. The problem is that people hold on to it after that.
Say, what's the point in holding on to sadness that happened when you were 7?
Yeah.
What's the point in holding on to that? The only reason...
I know a guy who grieved for his dog from age 9. He was 35.
I mean, it's understandable when a dog dies because especially, not only for kids, even for adults, the dog or the pet becomes part of the family. And when the dog dies...
Little Barfy.
It's normal to experience sadness or even grief. Kids experience grief. That's normal in the moment.
Yeah.
But 20 years later, to still hold on to that grief, what's the point? So pretty much all negative emotions are appropriate when they happen. However, it's not appropriate. It's pretty much a waste of energy to hold on to them 20 years later.
Yeah.
And when you probably experienced that yourself, it's a tremendous shift in the energy available for the body when you let go of negative emotions. You're not busy holding them down anymore. They're just simply gone. And it's like, okay, I can move now in the future.
Woo. Now, we need to talk a little bit about tasking, because the question often comes up in timeline therapy, well, do we ever use tasking? Should I use tasking? What is tasking? Anyway, so there's a couple of pages here that I want to talk about, and they're in your timeline therapy manual. And the first page I want to talk about is page 43. We're going to cover this later on in the DVDs. But let's look at page 43 in your manual for now. I want to talk about ordeals first and then tasks.
Now, we call it ordeals. You wouldn't tell the client it is an ordeal.
Yeah, you tell the client it's a task.
It's a task. But we call it an ordeal, and the tasking goes before you see the client as a client for a coaching session, and it can go after also, after you see the client as a client.
So, before we talk about that, because it's going to be right here, I want to talk about the 3 things we do in timeline therapy and all that, yeah?
We talked about this in the practitioner, but it's also true for the master practitioner. And we think that you should talk about these 3 things.
It's so important
which is called they are called the requisites for change with your client every single time you see a new client.
Yeah, it's so important that it bears repeating.
One of the most difficult things that you will probably have to do with some clients is to have the clients assume responsibility for what happens in their life.
Whoa.
Or to assume responsibility for the success of your coaching session. It is very hard because think of it. Here is a business executive coming to you and saying, I had the fabulous performance, my performance was just great, 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 now it's going down, and I don't know what to do. And it's very hard to coach a person like this.
By the way, that's why most coaches get hired, right?
If they think that
true.
you have to hold their hand and every day and every hour and tell them what to do every day and every hour.
Well, we could hold their hand.
You don't want something
It'd be
like
a lot
this.
more expensive. I mean, we could.
The-
We'd be
the-
happy to.
The client has to understand what your work is and what they need to do with the work you've done together. And here it is.
So we see the client in the office or in the coaching session, and what do we do? The first thing we do is we get rid of negative emotions. We do limiting decisions. We do parts integration. All the values work that you learned
Will certainly elicit
in
values.
this master practitioner training. Probably at the beginning of a coaching session, we'll do we'll take a Myers-Briggs written paper and pencil instrument.
meta programs.
We'll take the meta programs formally,
Yeah.
and we'll also do a values test, because all of those are important to know who the client is. And then, if the client's values need changing, we'll certainly change those, as you already know how to do. Now,
And then we'll create the future,
Create the
meaning
future.
we'll insert goals in future timeline for the client.
Now, if you're doing, let's imagine for a moment you're doing work at your office. In other words, the client comes to you at your office. I know in coaching you may go to the client's office, but in either case, when you're done with the session, with the coaching session, the client's going to leave and go and do his thing, whatever he does. Now, if the client what I noticed over the years, and since Adriana's and I have been together, we've noticed this more and more,
Absolutely.
is that the clients who leave a timeline therapy session and take action get infinitely better results than clients who leave the timeline therapy session and don't take action.
And
As silly as that sounds.
it sounds silly, but it's true. And the example we like to take always here, it's a very mundane example, the one of a car. And so we played this game during the practitioner with some of you, but I think it bears repeating.
Now listen carefully.
Because here is the whole thinking. Here is the secret of the whole thinking.
This is the whole thinking about taking action. Let me put taking action on the slide there. There we go.
So let's say that you are an environmentally friendly person and you use public transportation
You're meditating.
to go to work. And
You take the public
or
transportation.
maybe you walk or whatever you do. But you never had a car, and the thought of buying a car never occurred to you.
All of a sudden,
And all of a sudden,
From out of the blue.
an idea comes to you.
Buy a car.
You never had this thought before, but now
And
you
you go,
have this
"What?"
thought. Wow, buy a car?
what?
What a thought.
go,
Buy a car?
Buy a car.
I never thought of buying a car before. Buy a car, wow.
Wow.
Buy a car. Oh, maybe I should buy a car. Do you have a car? Do you have a car? This is a question.
Yes. That's a mistake that
That's
most NLP
the
practitioners make.
mistake. That's the
the big
mistake.
mistake that most NLP practitioners make. Listen carefully. The thought of a car
Is not a car.
is not a car.
It's just an idea of a car.
And
We
when you
don't
have an
a car.
idea of a car,
An idea of a relationship is not a relationship. An
You don't
idea
have a
of
car.
making more money is not more money.
consider it done in
Is
coaching
not
is
done.
not done. I love
See
it.
the difference?
And by the way, the words consider it done in business scare the hell out of me.
No.
No, I had a guy that used to work with me
Think of it.
in when we were doing business consulting, and I used to say, "Okay, Mark, let's get this done," and Mark would go, "Consider it done," and then 2 weeks later I go, "Whoa, what about the consider it done?" And he said, "Oh, I guess I didn't do it."
So we have an idea of a car.
Yeah.
Now let's say that you go to all your mental process and you decide, well, I've never thought of a car before. So is it a new car or is it a used car?
Do I want a big
Is it
car?
a big car or do I want an SUV or
Do I want a
want a
van?
sedan?
Or do I want a
do I want
small-
a small car? Do I want a small
car?
car so that for city living?
Do I want a gas guzzler, or do I want a? Hybrid.
Do I need it to, for my kids and for it's a family car or is just a car that I use
kind
for
of car?
work?
So you think about a car.
Do I need, what finances do I need? How much am I willing to pay? Am I talking to my friends?
financing, yeah. Talk to your friends.
What brands of car are now very good?
Do I have a car? No, I don't have a car.
Still don't have a car.
Guess what?
We've done all the mental
All
work
the
about
mental
a car.
work about a car is
Still not a car.
not a car.
Good. Let's say now you've got negative emotions. So the price of the gasoline is up.
Oh my God, that's
and-
through the roof.
and-
I
and
mean,
the-
what are you
and
going to
the
do? The
traffic sometimes
insurance.
is
Oh, no.
congested and it's just
The
stuck.
insurance through on the what's that free the underneath the the tunnel, the tunnel and the over the bridge and the
And the road
freeways
rage
and
nowadays, and it's
and don't forget
more-
the 5.
Now, let's say you do timeline therapy and you let go of all your negative emotions and you are left with only good positive emotions that whenever you need a car to be free to go wherever you want, even if it rains outside, you have a car.
Do you
And
have a
that's great.
car? No, you don't have
still
a car.
don't have a car.
Even if you're emotionally free of not having a car, you don't have a
You don't
car
have a car.
until you have a car.
And that requires you going to the dealership,
Now you go down to the dealership.
test drive a car,
Maybe you test drive a car. Maybe you don't. Maybe you
Sign
look at
the
all the cars.
papers,
You kick
discuss
the
the
tires.
conditions,
You
sign the
sign the
contract.
papers. You sign the contract. You get the loan.
Get the key.
Or you pay cash for it. You get the keys and you drive off the car lot. Do you have a car? Whew. Yes.
now you have a car.
Remember, the thought of a car in your client's mind
Is
is
not a
not
car.
a car. A car is a car.
So, number one, we've done all the mental work, the emotional work, the ideas, the thoughts, everything, the strategies is all done at number one. But the client has to take, you as a coach cannot take action for the client
The
because you're not
client's
the
got to
client.
take action.
You understand?
Bless his heart. The client's got to take action. And that may include enforcing his boundaries. We use an example in the practitioner about a young businessman who comes to you. And he says, He gets rid of his negative emotions, his limiting decision. We do parts integration. We could change his values if we need to. And we create the future. And we have him, okay, it's fine. And he goes back to work. He goes back to his work.
And let's say the presenting problem initially of this young businessman was that his boss asked him to do things out of integrity
That's a
or
presenting
unethical
problem.
things.
Yeah? Now he goes back to work.
Now he feels good. You've done all the timeline therapy work. Now he doesn't have any negative emotions anymore. He feels good about it.
Let's say the boss is still asking him to do unethical things.
Which the boss probably will, because the boss didn't do timeline therapy. The boss is still the old boss.
The boss still has the negative emotions that he always had. He's still the same old boss. So let's say the boss asks him to do unethical things. At this point, the client's going to have to enforce his boundaries. He's going to have to take action and say,
Either say,
look,
hey,
boss, I don't do that anymore.
or he will have to look around to find another job ultimately.
Or the client will have to, or find another job. Because if he doesn't, he's still going to have the same negative emotions.
So this is true in relationships, this is true in family, this is true in business, this is true in your career, this is true in every area of life. If you do, it doesn't matter how much work you do, if you go back in the same situation and your boundaries or values are being violated in the same old way, you're still going to experience the same old negative emotions.
So the client, when he leaves your office, must, absolutely must,
Take some form of action.
take action. Got to take action.
Maybe he needs to move in another sector or somewhere else. Or maybe he simply has to look for another job in another company, ultimately, if there is nothing else he can do in that company.
Now we'll talk about secondary gain for just a moment.
This
Now,
is very important.
let's say the young man can't leave the job he's in because unemployment
Economics,
is,
yeah.
unemployment is high at the moment.
Economics.
Right now it's not high, but unemployment goes up and down, as you know, with the wind. Yeah? And so in this case, unemployment is maybe too high for him to leave his job. So he comes back to me and goes, I can't leave my job. Yeah, so then what do? He's going to have secondary gain for staying in the job. Another situation. Client says, I can't, we've had clients come to us, and we say, what's the problem? And she says, the problem is my husband does this, my husband does that, my husband does this, my husband does that. And we
For 4 hours,
and by the way,
4 hours during a detailed personal history was nothing else she talked about but a lifetime of abuse she took from her husband.
verbal abuse, the husband fools around on her, he has affairs all the time. He's all the time doing this. And so I said to her, this is couple counseling. I mean, that'd be the first. By the way, if you have a client come to you, male or female, and the client says, the problem is my wife or husband or partner, then it's couple counseling immediately. But so she said, he'll never come here. I'm not even going to ask him, he'll never come here. So we said, what do you think you need to do? And she said, I think I need to leave my husband. By the end of the therapy, she said, I need to leave my husband. That's important because that's what her task becomes. We'll talk about that shortly.
No.
But she
But
couldn't.
before we get into that, please understand, and I cannot emphasize this enough, we cannot emphasize this enough. We think that you absolutely should never tell a client to leave or stay in a relationship.
Never,
I think it's never up to you
ever.
to suggest either way. However, whatever the client tells you, this is what the client requests from you, this is what you give the client. But I think you should have absolutely no opinion either way, because ultimately it's not up to you.
And ultimately, by the way, if the client decides to leave her husband, and then she changes her mind, she'll blame you for it.
Sure.
Regardless
If
of what
you
your
suggest
involvement
it.
was.
If you suggest it. So
Even
be
if you don't
very
suggest it.
careful, be very careful, and be very mindful and keeping in mind a lot of ecology.
So this leads us to the issue of secondary gain, and secondary gain means where the gain from the problem is bigger than the problem itself.
Which
So-
happens in many instances.
So, young man has a problem now. His boss is asking him to do unethical things, and at the same time, he can't take action, can't enforce his boundaries, because he's afraid of getting fired, or because, even worse, he couldn't find another job, or both. So, in that case, I think it's inappropriate for you to take undue responsibility for the success or failure of the therapy if the client is unwilling to take action. Because a client who says, see, I had a young man who said, my boss is doing unethical things, and I would say to him, how does that feel? He would say, it feels pretty bad. I would say, what do you think you need to do about that? Because I'm already thinking of taking action. I'm already thinking of taking action. See, he's going to leave the office. See, the line there on the slide says out of the office. So he's already thinking of what it is he needs to do next. So he's got to enforce his boundaries. Then the next thing he's got to do is he's got to focus on what he wants.
Let's say that he enforces his boundaries so much so that he needs to change his workplace. He finds another job somewhere else. He's very happy. It's a new job. It's a great job. He likes it there. But instead of focusing on what he wants now in the new job, he looks around and says, I know everybody's doing things that are out of integrity.
This is business. They must be
There are
doing unethical things.
There are unethical things everywhere. It must be here. I'm sure this boss is the new boss. The new boss is doing things that are unethical. Now, if he continues to focus on that, he ultimately will find it somewhere.
By the way, I've been doing client consulting and coaching for a long time, and I find that most all of the business people I ever meet are ethical and honest and aren't doing unethical things. I think it's a small percentage of people that actually do unethical things.
It's just an example, but the example is for you to understand that no matter how much coaching work you're going to do with the client, if the client goes back in the same situation and doesn't take action and doesn't focus on what he or she wants, ultimately he's going to experience the old negative emotions. And the client will come back to you and will say two things.
Oh, he'll go like
this.
this.
One of the
One
two
of two
things.
things.
Either he will say, it didn't work.
He'll say it
what
didn't
you did
work.
with me, it didn't work, because here are the negative emotions back.
Yeah, I got the negative emotions back. It didn't work.
Or I must have done something wrong because I've
got the negative emotions back. And what you need to do in situations like this, and this is very important, is you need to consider ordeals and tasks. So at the bottom of the slide here it says, so you need ordeals and tasks. Now let's look at page 43. We call a task an ordeal if it's the thing that happens before the therapy,
Page
before
43,
the session,
number 2.
before the coaching.
So you may need to assign an ordeal
This is on
when
page
the client
43.
is not paying for it himself, so has no investment. When he has seen multiple therapists for the problem, think of it. If a client has seen multiple therapists for a problem and he still has the problem, the client certainly has developed a lot of strategies for holding onto that problem.
Page 43, number 2, at the bottom of the page.
Good. When he feels the problem is significant, like my problem is bigger or different than anyone else's.
Or when he has a sense of pride or identity in having the problem. When you assign an ordeal, by the way, call it a task. When you assign an ordeal, get agreement he'll do it before you assign it. The ordeal should symbolically represent the source of the problem, and it should cause the problem to unravel. It should also have the following characteristics. It should cause the client to make an investment of energy and attention to do what you say, bringing him into compliance with your instructions.
Right.
Erickson used to have people climb Squaw Peak, not because he could or ever did, because Erickson was in a wheelchair when he lived in Phoenix. He had them climb Squaw, which is a pretty, it's a mountain out in Phoenix. And he had them climb up to the top of the peak, not because he wanted them to be fit, but because he wanted them to climb it because he knew when they climbed it, they would do anything he said. Now here's the problem with assigning an ordeal before the fact. If the client doesn't do it to 100%, what's the client saying to you?
Unconsciously. I'm not going to do what you suggest to 100%.
Yeah, I'm not going to do what you suggest under any circumstances to 100%. So you might think, oh, but 99% is okay. No,
And it's not.
99%
Because if you
is
do
not
a
okay.
timeline therapy process, the client's above the timeline and the client does the process to 99%.
How's it gonna
Is
work?
the emotion gone or not?
No.
No, it's not gone. And in timeline therapy, it's either gone or not gone. 100% gone is gone. 99% gone is not gone.
By the way, this is really important. If you get to position 3 and the client says it's going, it's not gone.
No.
You get to position 3 and the client says it feels a lot better, it's not gone. If you get to position 3 and the client says, I have to work through it, it's not gone.
I have to wait to integrate.
I have to wait to integrate?
Not gone.
It's not gone. And if it's not gone, it's not gone. Don't BS the client. It's not gone if it's not gone. If it's not gone, it's not gone. Same thing with this. If the client doesn't climb Squaw Peak, you know what Erickson says? Bye-bye. See you later. The client says, I didn't climb Squaw. What's the client saying to Erickson if the client says, I'm not going to climb Squaw Peak?
I'm not going to do what you
He
suggest.
says, I'm not going to do what you say.
Pretty much.
So why would you have a client who's not, by the way, listen. As timeline therapy master practitioners, you don't need clients.
We
You don't
said
need
this
clients.
in one of your practitioners, I think.
You don't need clients.
No, you don't.
What you want is clients who will get results. I followed this principle in business consulting, and we became the top business consulting firm in the city. Why? Because, and it's very simple, you don't need clients. We didn't need clients. You need to be willing to turn down a client who's not going to get results. If you look across at the client, I mean, you look right across at the client and you go, hey, this client's not going to get results. What are you going to do? Not take him on.
Waste your time and the client's time and the client's money? No.
Look at, now, if you have a client who's going to be, by the way, what's the best client to get as a business consultant or coach?
The client who wants to make it either with your help or without your help.
Because I had a couple of clients say, look, I'm going to be #1 in automobile dealing or #1 in this retail
I'm going to get there
category.
anyhow. Somehow I'm going to get there.
I'm going to be #1, and whether you help me or not, I'm going to be #1. That's the client you want to take on.
The client who's determined to get results.
Because he's committed
Yep.
to do whatever it takes. And anything short of doing whatever it takes isn't 100%.
Right.
So a client who does a task or an ordeal before the therapy and doesn't do it all the way, don't see him. I had a guy come from Beverly Hills. He flew all the way in from Beverly Hills. He came all the way from Beverly Hills, and he wanted to quit smoking. Medical doctor. He said, I want to quit smoking. I said, good. So before you come in, I want to give you a task. And by the way, this is my standard task for smoking, pretty much weight loss and addictive behaviors, is to make a list of, I said to him, every time you smoked, the trigger that caused you to smoke, and what you were thinking and feeling when you smoked each of the cigarettes you smoke. I'll say it again. Make a list. This, by the way, the list brings into consciousness stuff which is out of consciousness. Oh, that's the next one on page 43. It should bring into consciousness certain areas of thinking or behavior that were out of consciousness. For example, food journals for weight loss. So I said to him, so I want you to make a list of every cigarette you smoke each day between now and the time you see me, the trigger that caused you to smoke it, and what you were thinking and feeling at the time. So he comes into the office, and he hands me a 3x5 card. And on the 3x5 card, there were written 3 cigarettes. And so I looked at him and I said, is that all you smoked?
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks? 3 cigarettes? He said, no, I smoke 2.5 packs a day. Just before I finish the story, could I see him? No. So I remember this guy really well. Big doctor in Beverly Hills. So I took his 3x5 card and I went like this. And I ripped it up and I threw it at him. And I said, get out. And he goes, what? I said, that's right, I'm throwing you out. He goes, well, why did you do that? I said, because I asked you to make a list of the cigarettes and you didn't do it. He said, but I didn't think you were serious. I said, well, I am. So if you want to see me, make a list. So he came back 2 weeks later. 2 weeks later, he'd made a list. He had his full list, and it was
42 cigarettes.
42 cigarettes on the list. And I said, so what? 42 cigarettes? Is that all you smoked? And he said, this task is so onerous. He said, I'm down to 3 cigarettes a day. I said, good.
So if you can devise a task
I said, your task will be to keep
that
doing this
actually
task.
reduces the problem so dramatically as this and brings into client's consciousness what's going on, due to the task, the client's problem will be half gone by the time he sees you.
Yeah, which, by the way, makes the therapy a lot easier, makes the
Much
session a lot easier,
easier.
makes the coaching a lot easier.
Much easier.
The task could include, by the way, in coaching where you see the client on a weekly basis, always give the client tasks to do in the ensuing week between now and the time you see him. It'll make your results significantly better. By the way, page 44, the task could also include what the client has absolutely avoided
Oh, yeah.
or denied that created the problem. What is it they most do not want to do which could be related to the root cause? Yeah, so far so good. So that's ordeals up front. Now we got to talk about tasks. And tasks are on, we're going to, by the way, we're going to come back and look at this entire outline here.
This is how to do a
This is how to do a
breakthrough
personal
session.
breakthrough session. We are going to come back and look at it.
We'll get.
But before we do that, we're just going to look at tasks after the fact.
Which is on page 47, number 24.
The 3 requisites for change are also on page 47. As often as possible and where necessary, assign tasks that the client needs.
The task should presuppose and put the client in charge of maintaining success. This is very important. Put the client in charge of maintaining success. should cause the client to take action.
Oh, do you understand that? Put the client in charge of maintaining success. This is really important. If a client puts you in charge of maintaining his success, even in the coaching process, where's the cause? Where's the
Outside of
Where's
him.
the cause and effect? Where's the
Outside of
cause?
him.
Outside of him.
Exactly.
How does that
exactly.
work? Not well.
Not well. Not as well
Not
as
bloody well. It doesn't work well. Can I say that here?
in Australia. Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah, they even had an ad that said, "Where the bloody hell are you?" I guess I could say that.
So should cause the client to take action, focus on what he wants,
And play it 100%.
And play it 100%. What does it mean playing 100%? See, this is another issue which you as the master coach should understand. Playing at 100% doesn't work like this. I'll demonstrate first what it doesn't do and then how it should be. Yeah, I'll play it at 100%, but I can't do this because that's not me. By the way.
I had a client tell
Do
me
you
that.
want results or do you want excuses? It's
I had a
very
client tell
simple.
me that.
Do you want results or do you want excuses?
It was
There is no but if you really want to make it happen and you want to have 100% results. There is no but. There is no excuses.
I had a client tell me that. I said, here's taking action. This is what you need to do. He goes, that's not me. I said, yeah, because if it was you, you wouldn't have the problem you came to me for.
Exactly. And most people
No, I mean, really.
will think that not most meaning more than half, but many people, let's say, many people will think that they can't do something because it's not appropriate to their age, gender, business status, relationship with society, a family, etc., etc., etc.
And by the way, I
question is,
wasn't-
do you want results or reasons? You have to remember this.
I wasn't asking him to do anything unethical or illegal. Yeah?
Now, as crazy that this will be, if somebody would ask me, and let's say that I'm just wanting to develop my business. I started a new business now, or I'm working in a business and I'm a manager and I really want to develop this business. If somebody will come and a coach and will say to me, I guarantee you that if you get down on the floor and lie down on the floor and roll over like a roach with a turn over, and you'll do this with your legs and hands like this in the air, and that will ensure 100% success of your business, would you do it?
By the way, it's a good question for you to ask your clients when you're taking them on for coaching.
Because many people will say, no, that's stupid.
Yeah.
That's not stupid.
Would you get down on the ground and do
true.
it?
I will do this right now. This is it. Here it is. Yeah? And I know I look stupid, but if somebody says to me, this ensures success.
Looking
Bloody
good,
hell, we'll do
Adriana,
it.
looking good.
No. This is very important for you to understand as the master coach. Because you'll have people who will say, I'll do this,
But-
and this, but I want to do that.
Not that.
And that's not playing at 100%. And this is true for relationships. There is not a thing you can't do if you want to succeed in having a 100% relationship. There is not
Yeah.
a thing you can't do.
If Adriana said bark like
This
a
is
dog,
NLP we're talking about.
I would bark like a dog.
Something that you can't do right now. Something that you can't do right now doesn't mean you can't learn how to do. It's just a behavior, for crying out loud.
All right, I can
This
bark.
is NLP we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to learn new behaviors. We all can learn new behaviors. We all can actualize the maximum of our potential. The question is, are we willing to?
Yeah. So determine your client's willingness. And by the way, tasks and ordeals are going to tell you whether the client's willing. Is this client willing to do whatever it takes? Because if you get a client who's not willing to do whatever
Very
it takes,
important for you as the master coach.
you don't want to coach this client because he's going to be trouble the whole way. Not that he's going to be trouble, but he won't succeed because it's your fault, because you didn't make him succeed. And so a client who doesn't do your ordeal up front or your task afterward has a problem.
Yes.
Now, after the fact, and by the way,
And the clients who will do your ordeal and who will follow your instructions will be most successful.
yeah, when I did business consulting, we had clients who followed our advice 100%.
100%.
Yeah, we increased one guy's business 20 times in 12 months. He was very happy. Very
Wouldn't
happy.
you be?
20 times from one
Hey.
December to the next. Yeah? Very happy. We took Styles Precision Components in Middlesbrough, England, and they went from 20% closing ratio to 100% closing ratio.
Well, that's good.
Made them the largest manufacturer of prototyping materials in the world. Yeah, I worked with Mountain States Mortgage. They did exactly what we said. Exactly what we said. We went and did a training in Mountain States Mortgage, did exactly what we said,
Oh, yeah.
and it was just a 5-step sales process. They did, that's all it was. And they did exactly what we said,
And
the
the
net
secret of
worth,
creating your future.
and the secret of creating your future, and the net worth went up, in 2 years, the net worth went up 10 times of the mortgage company. So we have had some clients who do exactly what we say. And when the clients, in coaching and consulting, and when the clients do exactly what we say, they get great results. Fabulous results.
Okay, then more. They should be about tasking, back on page 47, number 24. The task should be assigned as a requirement.
And let me tell you, and remember the clients already agreed to do them. In the informed consent form, the client agrees that there will be tasking after the fact, which are part of the coaching process. And if he doesn't do them, the coaching is not guaranteed. That's in there, in the informed consent form. So, and we're going to go through the informed consent form here, in the next few days.
So should be assigned as a requirement and should reinforce the changes made.
For example,
You can use self-hypnosis, journaling, meditation, exercise, pendulum, whatever else you feel it's necessary. Assigned tasks should, wherever possible, continue the relationship with the unconscious mind and be sure to include whatever the client describes as being necessary for change.
now let's just say that a client comes to you for weight loss, and the client says,
I need to exercise
I need
more.
to exercise more.
What's the
What's
task?
your task going to be?
No,
exercise-
the task will be actually more specific
More
than that.
specifically than that, but it'll be to exercise specifically how much and when. Like,
How many times a week?
join a gym. In the States, join 24-hour fitness, join Fitness First in Australia.
Insert
join
goals
a gym
in the
and
future
go every week.
timeline. 5 times a week, the 5 goals in the future timelines for the next year at least, for the next 5 years.
A client who says, I want to quit smoking and I want to start walking more, what's the
task?
Task. Walk more.
A client that says, I'm not producing enough sales, I want to produce more sales, what's the tasking?
Make sales calls.
How many more for,
How many more sales calls? How many sales calls per day do you want to make? And that's going to be his specific
Part
task.
of his tasking.
So whatever the client wants you to coach him to do, his task becomes to do that.
Absolutely.
After you've gotten rid of all the things that prevent him from doing that. That's really the paradigm. And that's why you need ordeals and tasks.
Now, more about ordeals and tasks
Let's look at page
is
51.
on page 51.